Hello, it's Chris, welcome to my channel. I'm going to do another slightly longer form art video about an artist I find really interesting actually, Roberto Matta. Anyway, I'll do the full video channel introduction. So I'm an artist, painter myself, bit of all sorts, do lots of creative work, creative person in general, right? But today I wanted to talk about Roberto Matta, who's an artist I've been familiar with since I think about my early 20s, 36 now, and I always found his art very interesting and I'd say actually singular. I think I've only seen a few of the works in person. I think one or two of the actual paintings in person at the Tate Gallery. Many of them are very large. He was a painter who did paint often on a very large scale. He was associated with the Surrealists. He's a Chilean-born painter. He lived a remarkably long time as well. Actually, he died in I think 2002, and he was, he was born in. He was born, I think it's like 1911. So he lived a very, very long life. His paintings often have a sort of bizarre. They're like psychological landscapes in a way that's familiar, yet also uniquely his own. I think in a lot of respects, you could say in some respects like there is some matter of matter, pun intended, of relation to someone like H.R. Geiger, but much less. His palette was completely different to Geiger's. Geiger has a sort of monochrome and muted palette, whereas Matta's are almost like he was quite colorist actually, in my opinion. Some similar overlaps, but yeah, very different as well. And I think he is truly one artist, even of the Surrealist movement. And the Surrealist movement did create a lot of. The whole idea of the Surrealists was that they were tapping into their own individual unconscious, right? So that by definition you can expect a lot of variation in the experimentation of imagery and everything. But I think Matta is a endlessly fascinating artist for myself actually, because you sort of can tell when you're looking at a Matta painting, but also not as well. Like there's a lot of interesting diversity, and obviously the work changes and evolves. Artists have different stylistic sort of styles they sort of experiment with as they evolve and change over the years. Matta's imagery is, I think he was quite fascinated with visual spatial relationships. And like I said, but it's not like landscape, like someone painting a mountain or a forest scene or whatever. Completely different from that. It's like the most silly analogy probably to make would be like it's like a psychedelic drug trip or something, right? But that would be really paying it a disservice, I think, in many respects. There is a lot more at play in his work than just pure like psychedelic. Visual exploration. I mean, not that that can't be amazing. That obviously that can be amazing, and you can do a lot with that, sort of idea. But I speak from experience. Like I've got nothing against the whole psychedelic image making. But yeah, he like I said, he basically came out of the Surrealist movement. Like Breton and that whole group of Parisian Surrealists. I'm not hugely familiar actually with the specifics or detailed biography of his history of the Surrealists, so I'm not going to dive too deep into that because I have not read up enough about that part of his his specific involvement with the Surrealist group. He was hugely inspirational on the abstract expressionists actually, funnily enough. Achille Gorky, I know that he was quite an influence on Achille Gorky. His image making often is, I actually heard about this phrase through a fellow artist many years ago, biomorphism. So blending of organic and cosmic forms. which is really only something you can understand if if you see some examples of that. I'll just put up a few up, and there's like this almost like it's like you're looking into like a little world that isn't our own. It's completely different from our own. It's not even like anything like Inscape like. It's sort of like a combination of the world that we live in with subterranean world mixed with almost like something you'd see in Hieronymus Bosch or something like that, but not with the obvious like religious and hellish connotations. It's not really. They're not. Though he did paint religious subjects as well. Like he's got crucifixion paintings. It's from 1938. But it's not like a traditional crucifixion. It's very abstract. Your layman would probably look at a lot of this work and say it's just abstract. Sort of semi-abstract. Technically, I think it's more like semi-abstraction. It's using figurative starting points as a starting point to to fragment those starting points, but I wouldn't personally call them a purely abstract painter. I mean, obviously coming out of the surrealist movement, that wouldn't make much sense. Like surrealists weren't abstract painters really. I mean, obviously their abstraction came into their art, but it wasn't pure abstraction like abstract expressionists or colour field painters, or even them arguably aren't even pure abstraction, but long debate, long conversation, and not really what this video is about again. The scale, like I said before, of his work is epic. I've only seen a few of his works in real life, but they are very striking. They're very there's a lot of visually going on, but I still also think they often do feel compositionally very balanced, I'd say, even though they're very fragmentary. Like certainly one of the words that would come to my mind when I ever think or see a Matta painting is fragmentation. There is a breaking down of form. Like some of his most unsettling and but also jarring in a lot of ways paintings are his sort of like machine insectoid man forms, like humanoid forms. It's a sort of mixing of humanoid with the machine, with an insect, cyborgs, and if you actually bear in mind when this stuff was being made, like I think 1930s and 40s primarily, it's quite amazing. I mean, there are other artists who we're sort of exploring this territory. Actually, interestingly enough, Wyndham Lewis. If you look at some of Wyndham Lewis's paintings, not many of which survived, unfortunately. Wyndham Lewis is a British artist, a British painter, sort of like quite a controversial figure in some respects, but he was. Some of his work is it's very different to Roberto Matta's. Like it's more flat, I'd say. But there's more perspective and more thing going on in Roberto Matta's, and I think you could probably definitely say, like I say, the fragmentation is more than Wyndham Lewis, who I think was much more of a flatter plane painter. But yeah, there's a lot of like distortion in general in Roberto Matta's work. His use of colour is like really interesting. Like it goes between like muted colours and then more muted tones to really like quite intense use of colour and colour mixing. The way he handles paint is quite extraordinary. Actually, to be honest, even like looking at some of the works here that I'm just looking at, referring to when I'm doing this, I'm not even sure what techniques he even used to achieve a lot of these paintings. Some of them have a very they have like a very fluid substance, like almost like gaseous in some respects. Like some of them are, I do look at a lot of his work and I'm like, I have no idea. Like I know a bit about painting methods and techniques. Like I know a little bit how you apply paint, and enough so that I can do paintings myself. But some of the imagery is just so vivid and otherworldly that it's impossible almost to put it into words. Definitely this like cosmic feeling. And yeah, the colour is like varied and sometimes quite jarring. Look, I'm just looking at an image now. Got like purples, blues. Almost looks like meat coming out of a shelf, and it's mixed in with all this other. It's so bizarre. It's got this real weird, uncanny feeling to a lot of it, and yeah, I think I've just seen the painting. Actually, have seen in real life. That's ro옷βeɾto, 1943. That's the one of the tape. So I've seen this painting. So I'll put up now. Obviously, ro옷βeɾto. I've seen this painting in the flesh, and yeah, it's just a really interesting painting to look at. It's so, I mean, you can see where there's a relationship between Matta and Gorky when you look at this painting, and this probably would have been around the time that I think that Gorky, or just prior to the time that Gorky would have been exposed to Roberto Matta. Probably Gorky was a very well-read painter in that. I definitely can see how Roberto Matta's experimentation with mark making and sort of like abstraction derived from landscape, or a landscape, or mental inner landscape, would have inspired Gorky. You can see that there's an overlap there. They're different painters, like they have different style, they have a different way of achieving the same end result, but there is an overlap there, certainly on some level you can sort of see between both of the paintings, right? But yeah, this is a fantastic painting, and I really do like the surface that I see. Like I said, I've only seen a few in the real life, so I'd have to really see them in real life. But just the movement that you get in the paintings, and the way that it's like you're being sucked into a vortex of energy. I think he definitely was a painter of energy. I mean, you could argue all art painters are, I suppose, but that sort of there's a velocity to them. There's a feeling of velocity, of movement across the canvas plane. Some of them are, like I said, some of them you could say are relatively playful, almost like, it's almost like he's mixing someone like Paul Klee in like the more optimistic, sort of like brighter paintings. There is something of the Paul Klee, but with a further level of abstraction, almost like a spiritualism to sort of those images and the sort of landscapes. But yeah, there's that sort of like psychedelic discombobulation. Some of them are very dark though as well. Like, some of them are just like almost nightmarish. So one of the things I really like about Matta is there's extremes of light and dark in his work. I mean, this is something in general in any art that I love. Like someone like William Blake, I think he probably explored that in some way. You've got painted demons and angels at the same time. Yeah, music, Aphex Twin. Some Aphex Twin tracks will keep you up for 2 days if you listen to them long enough, like a dark ambient. But then on the flip side of that, some Aphex Twin tracks just send you to a blissful sleep of just like transcendental bliss because they're so beautiful and they reach so deeply into your soul that you could die to those pieces of music, like Roberto Matta or whatever. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent there. He's an artist well worth exploring. This is not going to be too much of an in-depth formal analysis or anything, or going deep into his history. He's just a fascinating artist. I'd implore you to check him out in your own time. I'll give a little bit of I'll wrap the video up, but I'll give a little bit of a background on him. So this will be the final part of the video. When I've talked about the paintings and the work, I'll talk a little bit about his background, like a bit of his biography and that. So yeah, Roberto Matta, born in Santiago, Chile, on November 11th, 1911. So he grew up in a Catholic family, so he's a cultural family basically. He was trained from 1929 to 33. He studied architecture and interior design. That makes sense, obviously, because there is an architectural quality to his work. That actually does make a lot of sense because I didn't actually know. I probably read it ages ago, but yeah, that does make a lot of sense because there is that architectural quality. I mean, architecture on acid maybe, but yeah, there definitely is that. So he devised an ambitious architectural project called the League of Religions. So this was, his early biomorphic interests, fantastical spaces. Never seen any of those. I'll try and get pictures of them if I can find them. He went to France in 1935. He was an apprentice to the modernist architect Le Corbusier, who I've heard of, but I don't know a great deal about because I'm not like an architecture buff. He became friends with literary avant-garde. Federico Garcia Lorca, who I've heard of. Pablo Neruda, great poet. Gabriela Mistral. So it's through Lorca, I think who I've actually heard of before, because he was a friend of the famous surrealist artist Salvador Dali. So it's actually Dali, apparently, who encouraged Matta to show some of his drawings to Breton. Now, Breton was like the sort of sometimes categorized as sort of the high pope of surrealism. Whether he liked that name, I do not know. But he was like the de facto intellectual head of the surrealist movement. So Breton bought several of his drawings. He officially joined the surrealist group in 1937. Interesting, I didn't know this. He worked as the architect's designing the Spanish Republican Pavilion at the Paris International Exhibition, where the seminal piece Guernica by Pablo Picasso was on display, which if anyone knows their art history, most people who know anything about modern art history will know about this. Guernica was bombed. It was bombed during the war, prior to the Second World War, but it was bombed by fascists, basically. Civilians unarmed, just a complete atrocity. Pablo Picasso painted Guernica in response to that at the Spanish Republican Pavilion while the Spanish Civil War was going on. So yeah, this had a lasting impact on the development of Matta's own personal style, which makes complete sense, because that painting, which I've unfortunately never seen in real life, was a seminal moment in modern art history. You know, whether or not you think Pablo Picasso was an asshole or not is sort of irrelevant. No one can deny that was a seminal history painting, a true history painting in modern art history. It looks like he was exposed to Marcel Duchamp's work. Again, another very important avant-garde artist at the time, incredibly influential even to now. You know, and probably I can definitely see the influence from Duchamp into his painting work, because there is that same concern of portraying movement and energy through time and space. I think there definitely is a time and space and movement concern in Matta's work, which makes it just really interesting, to be honest. Okay, so just go through. I'm going to go through this actually because this is quite interesting. His earliest work were crayon drawings using automatism. Yeah, so he's like automatism basically is just drawing directly from the unconscious, not really, with rapid sort of like mark making. So he was referencing organic growth patterns, microscopic views of plants, non-Euclidean geometry. And then he transitioned to oil painting in 1938, working with British artist Gordon Onslow Ford in Brittany. I'm not actually aware of Gordon Onslow Ford, that's interesting. So he created these first works, and he called them the psychological morphologies. He's exploring the subconscious mind for a language of abstract forms and constantly evolving multi-dimensional spaces. So again, it goes into the whole non-Euclidean geometry and sort of like morphing of. So he referred to these works as inscapes. So I guess like an internal mental landscape purely created from the imagination. And the implication being that they depicted the interior landscape of the artist's mind, interconnected with his external reality, so a melding of the internal and the external world, which is a familiar surrealist concept, but I think the way that he executed it was sort of one of a kind in a way. I mean, you can refer to other surrealists who also did that, but certainly I think Matta stands out. Miro actually isn't that dissimilar. I find his work's in a lot of ways his work's very different from Miro, but in other ways there are overlaps, and Miro obviously was also a surrealist. So he fled to America from Europe in 1939. Pretty obvious why that would happen. Given what was happening at the time. So he was one of the youngest surrealist immigrants. Yeah, so he formed a relationship with a lot of the New York school artists who would later become the sort of famous abstract expressionists: Pollock, Gorky, Basiotis, Bucer, Robert Motherwell, and they would meet frequently with Matte, and from there was a cultural exchange from the sort of continental painters to the American emerging abstract painters, basically of the 40s and 50s, who basically became the dominant, culturally dominant, avant-garde after the Second World War. So I think this is where he started in the mid 1940s to move to more active engagement with the world. This is a series called the Social Morphologies. So this is where the machine-like imagery comes in, menacing machine-like contraptions and totemic human forms. So this is where it's like the whole dehumanization of the human figure. This is quite a trend that you see in a lot of art. So like if you look at the German expressionists, especially the guys who went through the horrors of the First World War, that marked their style for the rest of Otto Dix's war paintings are the most horrific paintings of war that you can ever see. Actually, the woodcut prints or whatever, like drawings of it. Otto Dix's work during the war, representation of the trench warfare are horrific. And now, obviously, Matte wasn't that directly engaged with it. He wasn't actually on the front lines, but obviously, it's going to have a psychological effect on the work. So he had some creative success in the 40s. It created a bit of an intellectual rift within the surrealists and abstract expressionists. There was a bit of a split there, I guess, because he was. I don't know exactly why this would be actually, but he's introducing some sort of narrative to his work that created a rift. I'm not exactly sure what that would happen with the abstract expressionists and surrealists. Then there's a big tragedy. This really was a tragedy for art of that time. Achille Gorky, who was an Armenian refugee who escaped to the Armenian genocide and went to the US, and I've seen his retrospective. He's a brilliant painter in his own right. He committed suicide. A lot of I've actually seen there's a really good documentary worth watching without Gorky, which goes into a lot further detail about that episode of art history, but there's a lot of personal tragedies beset the poor man, and it led to his ultimate suicide, unfortunately. I actually didn't know this. So Gorky had been having an affair with Matte had been having an affair with Gorky's estranged wife, so the surrealist circle blamed Matte. It's like a little bit of infighting, basically. I mean, like, I'm not going to comment on that. I don't know anything about it, really. It's the first time I've ever heard of it, so I'm not going to comment on that, really. So he was a bit ostracised then. He returned to Europe in 1948. He moved to Italy in 1955, and then he kept residencies in both Paris and Rome. Then he rejoined the Surrealists in 1959, and he declined. So he just wanted to forge his own work outside of any formal movement, and he just carried on working. His late period, so he travelled for Europe, Latin America. He became more politically and socially engaged. He thought it could be a powerful agent for societal change. A lot of his work was created in response to events like civil rights, the war in Vietnam and Algeria. They became more narrative based. They featured totemic figures within multiplayer. I'm less familiar with a lot of this work, specifically strange science fiction on machines. So sort of like an evolution, but just applying it more to like social issues and causes. So he dedicated himself in the 1960s to political and social issues in Latin America. This is really interesting, actually. I didn't actually know that much about this. He supported Salvador Allende's socialist government in Chile. So that's really interesting, because that is an entirely fascinating period of history, but especially of the left and sort of like socialist governments and experiments. it's a whole horrible bloody history if you actually want to look into that, because there was a coup basically, and Pinochet came into power as a fascist dictator, basically military dictatorship. Eventually got rid of that government in 1973. That's way too much to go into here, and I've already gone on for quite a while, but yeah. The zenith of Matta's engagement with Latin American cultural themes was this group of works titled El Mediterráneo y el Verbo en Eracas. It's a series of poems and paintings, analogies between American and European cultural renaissances. So, and the rest of this is basically just going on as latter day exhibitions. I think I'll end up there. That's like basically the history, and obviously he lived to a grand old age. Obviously, I think he must be 90 something, right? 90 something years old. He really was one of the oldest artists, especially of that generation. A lot of the artists from 1911. How many artists made it from 1911 to what was it 2004, 2002, 2004? That is like. Even past Picasso himself, 2002. So he almost saw. He saw all the major moments. Well, he lived through all the major moments of the 20th century. Like the 20s, the war, the First World War, the Roaring 20s, the Swinging, whatever it's called, the 30s, the chaos of the 30s, the 40s, and then the war again. In the post-war period. So an amazing, incredible person, really, just like having lived through all that. And the work is just invigorating. It's quite unlike anything else you're likely to see in much other places. Anyway, I've rambled on for a long time. I hope this piques your interest in terms of like exploring Roberto Matta. He was definitely one of the artists that, when I first started exploring the sort of more outer edges of like surrealism and like sort of exploring surrealism in general, I just had an immediate connection to his work, and I've always found him a very fascinating artist. I don't really know much about what he said himself about his work that much. Probably just like translation. I'll have to seek it out, but probably the work. I mean, obviously, with any artist, the work just doesn't really need all the verbiage around it. The work usually speaks for itself, right? One way or the other, and I think his does. I do really rate him as he's one of my favourite surrealists, actually, to be honest. I think he's a fascinating painter. Anyway, I've just said that loads of times. Like and subscribe if you like this. I'll probably try and do a few more little videos talking about artists I like and why I like them, and a little bit about history and everything else in the future. This has been quite interesting. Yeah.